As I mentioned earlier in the program, new footage from inside the facility has revealed how the Wuhan Institute of Virology kept live bats in cages, disproving denials from World Health Organization investigators who claim the suggestion was a mere conspiracy. Sky News host and investigations editor at The Australian, Shari Markson, broke the news on her program here last night. She's explained this latest revelation is a crucial piece of the puzzle because it raises the distinct possibility a lab employee may have become infected from a diseased bat housed in cages at the Wuhan Institute. Let's cross live to former China resident and expert, Queensland LNP's Ted O'Brien. Thank you very much for your time, Ted.
Pleasure to be with you, Chris.
Many of us copped it early last year when we highlighted a few anomalies that many of us thought pointed to the possibility of a Wuhan lab error. That was certainly what my view was. But the scientific and then last night the visual evidence all seems to be pointing in one direction, doesn't it?
Look, Chris, it's disturbing, there's no doubt about it. And this is why the most recent call from President Biden is spot on. It is why we need transparency. It is why we need to shine a light into the lab in Wuhan and all associated matters. I truly believe it is in the interests of the Chinese Communist Party, as much as it is the rest of the world, for us to get to the bottom of this. It is one thing for the communist regime to be able to control media and propaganda within its own borders, but it cannot do so outside. And as we know, in a liberal democracy, if a conspiracy takes hold, the only way to put it to bed is with transparency. And I think transparency is the word that we must keep using so we have unfettered access to the experts to get to the bottom of this.
You see, in terms of a virus moving from, say, an animal to a human, you have to have the animal in front of you. And there were no animals of a bat variety in the middle of winter in that Wuhan wet market. And yet, as we've discovered last night, there were most likely bats inside the Wuhan Institute. So if you're trying to find a connection, and I agree it's probably skipped from a bat to a human, you've got to have bats and humans together, which is why Wuhan needs to be opened up to the WHO.
Yeah, indeed. And I think what has been revealed is probably, in your introduction, you mentioned a piece of the puzzle. It goes to how puzzling this entire thing is. And a puzzle, like any riddle, will not be answered unless you have all the pieces together. If indeed we're barking up the wrong tree on this, there's only one thing that can put it to rest, and that is evidence.
Yeah.
And there's only one way you can get evidence, and that is that unfettered access. It just keeps coming back to that, Chris. And this is where the world needs to unite, because this is not about a geostrategic issue principally. This is about a matter of humanity. This is about a pandemic that has turned the world upside down. And I think we owe it to all future generations to understand what's happened so we can mitigate the risk of this happening or, God forbid, something even worse happening in the future.
You see, one of the obstacles in the way of transparency, I would have thought, and Donald Trump raised this spectre only recently, is that if it is found that this was a deliberate or accidental action that took place from that lab, we may see that China is called on to pay reparations. And how do you make reparations to the rest of the world when you've lost so many millions of people?
Well, how do you place a value on a life, Chris?
Yeah.
Answer that question, and you're a better man than I. But there is no doubt, I think the apportionment of blame is a secondary issue. And
Correct.
I think we have to ourselves be careful not to promote that as being the principal purpose here. This is genuinely about trying to find out what happened.
Yeah. And making sure it doesn't happen again.
Exactly. I'm a realist when it comes to international affairs, but on issues like this, you actually have to take a principled position. This is about humanity. This is about a pandemic that does not discriminate across borders or ethnicity or language, let alone politics, which is why we must get to the bottom of it. And delighted, of course, to see the Prime Minister at the G7 to reinforce Australia's support of the President's view on this.
I'd be interested to get your view on what may happen in our Pacific region in terms of military presence. Now, I raise that for two reasons. Firstly, we've had the G7. We've had Australia speak with America, speak with the UK about, I guess, a fracture of security in the Indo-Pacific region. And then on top of that, we're hearing from Taiwan and one of our own military officials that there's been an apparent encroachment by armed Chinese fishing vessels in Australian waters. Do you think that in the near future we will see a greater presence of US, UK military vessels?
Chris, I believe that we are going to see an increased presence because I think the Indo-Pacific is certainly going to be the centre of global affairs moving forward. And it's in our interest to ensure that we have our friends and allies in this region, particularly the United States, recommitting itself under this new administration to our region. That's critically important. Australia certainly does not wish for a war, anything but.
No.
But if you wish to have peace prevail, it must be peace based on a set of values where each nation is treated with mutual respect, where there's a rule of law. And that is really the liberal international order that exists today. And it is of highest priority that we ensure the security and stability of that system. That is not just relating to alliances for military purposes, of course. One of the big things that the G7 made great advances on was economic arrangements. Having like-minded, free market, liberal democracies standing together, saying that economic coercion of one power against another, which is contrary to international rules, should not be tolerated. And as a set of like-minded nations together, they will push back where that happens. I think that's critically important because we do know that the economic coercive measures adopted by China in recent times have been targeting Australia. And we can't have China picking off one liberal democracy after another, substituting trade with another. And that's why a united effort is so critical.
Yep. Ted O'Brien, I appreciate your insight. Thank you for your time.
Pleasure, Chris. All the best.